Welcome back to our third preview video for the Jurassic Park Card Game. The last one we looked at was employees, the main three characters from the first Jurassic Park, and now we're going to go back to look at some more species cards. I'm sure the dinosaurs are the most exciting thing for most people, so I think the schedule plan for previews is basically going to be to alternate between a new set of species previews and then demonstrating some cards from the individual card types leading up to the beta release. So for this video, we're going to look at some of the Isla Sorna species. I think we'll go chronologically here. Maybe we'll double up on Jurassic World because there's going to be a lot of stuff that kind of gets bundled into that. Which kind of just ties into, in part, the main inspirations of the game, right? It's a park building game, so the two films that have the most content that applies to specifically building a park are Park and World directly. Less so Lost World, JP3, and Fallen Kingdom. Of course, they're still represented, or else this wouldn't be a video. So, let's get started here. First preview, Compsognathus. So, obviously, it wouldn't be a Isla Sorna preview video if we didn't include some iconic species like the Compy. The Compsognathus ability here is a clone trigger, so that's the first time you introduce the species into the park, you get that effect. It does not apply to generating additional population for the species. The Compsognathus is kind of designed a little bit differently from some of the other cards we've looked at previously. This is kind of coming more from a direction of a card ability I wanted in the game and figuring out what species it fits with, as opposed to just starting from the species and working an ability out for it based on what it does. The idea here as to why this card ability, the draw card ability, applies to Compsognathus is it's kind of a swarm type ability. It's not, let's say, potentially the best way to represent a swarming kind of card effect, but I think it works well, and I think it fits with Compy. You know, I wanted Compy to be a fairly cheap thing to clone, a rarity of only 5, because it's a small dinosaur. And the ability here, the cheap draw card trigger, fits really well on a cheap dinosaur. So it meshes well with the cheapness I wanted for the Compy, and it meshes well with the notion of it being swarm-based. Also worth pointing out that Compsognathus, I always forget the pronunciation, is a Ceratosaurus, like the Tyrannosaur, which gives it kind of a unique niche in the card game. Of having that extra subtype there. Not all clades of theropod are given a trait in the card game. It's usually just pulling out certain ones that kind of are special to the franchise. Spinosaurids, Ceratosaurs. I've opted for making a Ceratosaurids a clade, which may or may not actually persist. But like Allosaurus is just a base theropod. We haven't made Allosaurids a clade. Because basically it's just, Allosaurus and maybe Mamenchisaurus. I'm not sure if Mamenchisaurus is an Allosaurid or not. It might be a Megalosaurid. And then, yeah, we've also got theropod as kind of a catch-all clade, and then the smaller ones that are derived off of that, like Ceratosaurus. But we don't double up on the secondary clade types. So, like a raptor is given the raptor clade and not Ceratosaurus and raptor, right? So a more specialized clade type overrules the more general clade type, with the exception of the broader clade of theropod, basically. That's how that kind of balance works there, the game design. Yeah, and when it comes to hybrids, which we'll get into in future videos, the hybrids like the Indominus Rex will probably not have these clade subtypes because they mix so many clades together, they effectively cease to be specialized in a way. There'll be some exceptions to that. I mean, like the Indoraptor should still be a raptor. It's literally in the title. But it shouldn't necessarily be a Ceratosaurus despite having Tyrannosaur DNA, right? That's the kind of idea there with how the clade stuff's going to work out. So, second species from the Lost World, Mamenchisaurus. Now, Mamenchisaurus, when designing this iteration of the game, was kind of one of those species that was pushed back for quite a while. Like, it was hard to find a good effect for it, because what does Mamenchisaurus do in the film? Basically nothing. It's there for 3 seconds, and it has no impact on anything. Which results in the issue of like, how do you come up with a thematic ability from Mamenchisaurus, a dinosaur that has almost no impact? So this kind of just ended up being an ability that I thought was interesting to have in the game. There's a few instances of that, especially with dinosaurs that don't actually appear on screen, like Mamenchisaurus, as I mentioned, and some of the other original Jurassic Park species like Corythosaurus. So yeah, so some species kind of just end up not having as thematic of abilities as they could maybe have, just because they don't have they don't have a very strong cinematic presence. So what Mamenchisaurus does here is it kind of has like a peaceful sort of mechanic to it. When you clone the Mamenchisaurus as a new species in your park, you get this little effect here that kind of shuts down obstacles for all players and keeps all players from winning the game for a round. Kind of just a stall effect, which feels appropriate for a large sauropod, that it kind of, bogs things down, right? It gets in the way. And Mamenchisaurus was really the only sauropod that didn't have a well-defined role to it. So when I had this card effect and I wanted to find a dinosaur to put it on, it just naturally, synced up really well with Mamenchisaurus. Our third preview from the Lost World, we got Pachycephalosaurus, which is a Pachycephalosaurid. Not too much else to mention here. Herbivore, cheap. The Pachycephalosaurus has this little effect here of adjacent carnivores getting a debuff to ferocity when they're attempting to escape. So you want to... Pachycephalosaurus is kind of unique, and this is true of all Pachycephalosaurids. They are unique in the sense that their positioning within your park layout matters a lot. Because obviously if you put an herbivore on either side of the Pachycephalosaur paddock, its game text would effectively be blank and you'd be getting no benefit from it. So that's kind of the niche I've given to the Pachycephalosaurids, Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch, and any potential future ones that might show up. So Pachycephalosaurus specifically has this effect where it reduces the ferocity of adjacent carnivores. This is a little bit reminiscent of the new Tyrannosaur effect we saw in the first preview video. I'm not a huge fan of them being as similar as they are. The Pachycephalosaurus effect has much more of a history behind it. This has been the effect of the Pachycephalosaurus species for quite a while. So I'm going to stick a tiny asterisk on here that this could change in the beta. If I came up with a different concept or niche that I liked for Pachycephalosaurus and or Stygimoloch, we might see these shift. I'm going to say that you probably won't see these change. I'm just going to throw that out there that it could happen. And kind of the concept here, like with adjacent effects, they headbutt, right? They ram into things. They ram into their adjacent neighbors, right? It makes some sense. Pachycephalosaurus fairly aggressive and dangerous for a small herbivore. At least in the context of the films, you see it, headbutt the Jeeps in the Lost World. So it makes sense that it kind of keeps the carnivores nearby in check. Then we'll move on to some Jurassic Park 3 previews. Corythosaurus is our first. So this game effect here, we've got adjacent species, once again, matters where it goes, getting +1 income. Unlike the Pachycephalosaurus, though, this is just... You just need Corythosaurus with some dinosaurs on either side of it. You don't need a particular type of species. People making noise. You don't need a particular type of species on any adjacency to this, right? So it's not as specialized as Pachycephalosaurus. The concept here with Corythosaurus, very cheap, but it provides low income, low fame. Oh shoot, these stats are wrong. I need to update these. Sorry. A little bit of an explanation. The legacy of the Corythosaurus is it used to be a starter species, but I made some adjustments to which species were the starters, which resulted in Corythosaurus's original starter slot being taken over by a Mamenchisaurus to have a more Jurassic World specific hadrosaur put into that niche. Because we had, if you remember in the previous species preview video, that's terrible phrasing, we had Gallimimus and Brachiosaurus as starters. And kind of what I'm trying to do is to kind of even out the species niches across the different films. Although generally I approached Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 as one unit, and then Jurassic World is generally approached as two separate. Gets twice as much presence because there's so many species that are present in Jurassic World. it has more kind of available content for that sort of thing. So yeah, these are the stats for Corythosaurus when it was a starter species. These are not the current stats. It should be 1 income, but it should be like 3 fame. Not the stats aren't terribly important. Point is, Corythosaurus is fairly cheap as a species. The rarity cost here is also wrong. The effect is correct though. Yeah, so basically Corythosaurus and Mamenchisaurus just traded places, with Mamenchisaurus becoming the starter and Corythosaurus becoming a standard species, and getting this adjacency effect, which makes more sense for Corythosaurus anyway than it does for Mamenchisaurus. Corythosaurus, you see it in Jurassic Park 3 only in the Stampede scene, right? Which is a mixed species herd of many dinosaurs. Situations where this income increasing effect kind of makes sense. It kind of simulates a mixed herd sort of gameplay effect. So yeah, that's the Cory. Ceratosaurus, right? Another Jurassic Park 3 only species, well, before Camp Cretaceous. This one has the correct stats. The Corythosaurus is the only one that I messed up the stats on because I changed that over for this beta, specifically just swapped those two. Ceratosaurus was kind of another one that was a little hard to come up with an effect. Because, once again, it doesn't do much. It just sniffs some poo and then goes, ew, and leaves. But that actually, funny enough, ended up, through some other card effects, coming up with the concept for what the Ceratosaurus does. So, one other card in the game that I haven't previewed yet is One Big Pile, which is the Triceratops dung from the original film. And what that does is it pulls cards out of your discard pile, which is called the trash. And so Ceratosaurus kind of keeps that theming of refuse going, right? Except the Ceratosaurus doesn't like the Spinosaurus dung. So what the Ceratosaurus card effect does is it gets rid of the trash. It removes the trash from the game, which is what the extinct phrasing is for. Any card that is considered extinct is considered removed from the game. So yeah, so that's how the Ceratosaur effect was come up here. It's just an anti-discard pile dinosaur effect. And finally, we'll have our headliner for this video, the Spinosaurus. Now, the Spinosaurus effect here, when clone, choose any card in your trash and place it in your hand, so get a card out of your discard pile back, that's not terribly thematic to Spinosaurus, right? And the reason this ability feels a little bit more generic is this actually ties into what the Spinosaurids as a larger group do. The Baryonyx and the Suchomimus will have variations on the Spinosaurus fishing ability. That's the concept here. These creatures are fishing cards out of your trash pile because they're Spinosaurids and they fish. So what I ended up doing is kind of designing the Suchomimus, the Baryonyx, and the Spinosaurus as a cohesive trilogy of effects, with the Spinosaurus' effect being the strongest out of the 3 because it is a headliner species and a unique large cost creature that goes into your park. One specific thing with the stats on the Spinosaurus is it having ferocity of 5, which puts it ahead of the Rex, which it kills in Jurassic Park 3. So it should be a more fierce species because of that, since ferocity is representing how how tough and how damaging the creature is when it escapes, or in concept, maybe not in execution as much, in concept of when it might fight another dinosaur. So yeah, that is it for the previews for this video. So next week we'll be back for a different card type. And then the week after that, we'll start looking at some Jurassic World species. So until then.